Our next session here is going to give us a little overview of two remarkable organizations working in the Blackfoot Valley. One is the big Blackfoot chapter of Trout Unlimited, and the other is Blackfoot Challenge. These are extraordinary groups that have got national attention for what they have accomplished. I'm most familiar with the DBCTU component. It's a small chapter in Trout Unlimited. In Trout Unlimited terms, it's one of the smallest. In terms of its accomplishment, it is number one in miles of tributaries restored, miles of trout spawning, water is reopened to spawning trout, bridges built, culverts fixed. I mean, the list of accomplishments is amazing. Blackfoot Challenge works hand in hand with them. I could go on for an hour talking about how cool these two groups are, but that's not my job. My job is to introduce to you the people who are much more intimately involved with them. Ryan Heidecker, who is the, I would call, I believe, still project manager for Trout Unlimited. Is that the proper title?
Grandmaster.
And Sarah Schmidt from Blackfoot Challenge. Between the two of them, they're going to tell you some amazing stories here. Amazing accomplishments that have gone to turn this river into what it is today. So, Ryan and Sarah, it's your podium. Oh, I was supposed to mention. I forgot to mention, Ryan is an evacuee from Sealy Lake. She's living in a camper for the last 3 weeks or so be easy on her.
Thanks, Jerry. So I'm Ryan, and this is Sarah. Let's see if I can get this thing. Is it okay if I do this?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So we're going to tag team this. It's going to be kind of informal, but I just wanted to thank the folks that put this festival together. You know, Jenny was great. She has been working with us for the past year and really trying to. She did a great job of including us. We were supposed to have a tour this morning, but that got canceled with the smoke and the fire danger. But you know, just really trying to highlight the restoration that has happened in the Blackfoot and all the partners that are working together. So we appreciate the opportunity to come and talk to you. Again, we're going to tag team this. I don't think we have a clicker. Maybe we do. So to bring it right down to what we're talking about with this festival. So the movie The River Runs Through It, how many of you know where it was filmed? All right, so you know it wasn't filmed in the Blackfoot, right? So we're going to spend the next 30 minutes or so and talk about the reasons why we think if there was a sequel to A River Runs Through It, the Blackfoot would be the perfect place to tell that story. When the producers came to the Blackfoot all those years ago and they saw that the water was running, was muddy and the flows were low and it did not illustrate the vision that Norman so eloquently penned in his novel. And so they moved it. But again, we hope that you'll be convinced as we are that if we could have a do-over, the Blackfoot would definitely tell his story.
So the stories of Blackfoot Chapter of Trout Unlimited and Blackfoot Challenge are really interwoven. So we'll be kind of talking a little bit about both of these organizations interchangeably, and I think the reasons that they got started, and there are people in this room who know this story a lot more intimately than I do, but are very similar. I wanted to start briefly by just introducing us. I think most people in this room know where the Blackfoot River is, but we're often presenting to people who don't, because there are people that come from all over the Montana, the United States, the world, to learn about what BBCTU, which I'll call the Toronto Limited Chapter for short, and the Blackfoot Challenge have done. And so just to note that it's in the lower left-hand corner, you can see that 1.5 million acre watershed landscape outlined with red. It crosses 3 separate counties, and then some of the major tributaries are noted on the map. The Blackfoot River is 132 miles long, starts at its headwaters at Rogers Pass, past Lincoln, on the Continental Divide, and then runs down to its confluence with the Clark Fork at Bonner. It also shows us it's a very forested, heavily forested landscape, about 80%. And it's also positioned at the southern end of this larger ecosystem, the crown of the continent ecosystem, or the northern continental divide ecosystem. One of the most biologically intact ecosystems in the world. All of the species that historically were in this area are still there today. And it also emphasizes, by showing us the Swan watershed, the Blackfoot watershed, and then the Rocky Mountain front, our neighbors, the map in the back actually shows kind of the interconnectivity of this mosaic of ownerships between private and public. And really the impetus for a lot of the Blackfoot Challenge's work was getting those individuals to talk to one another. If we're going to try to manage this area with a larger view, we need to be communicating across borders. So what this also means, being part of this intact larger landscape, is that the Blackfoot watershed is not home only to species like Homo sapiens, but it's also home to a variety of other species, threatened, endangered, and species of concern. And with the reintroduction of trumpeter swans in the lower right, they were last documented, the last known sighting of them before they were found on a private property up in Lincoln was in 1804, when Meriwether Lewis was traveling back east through the Blackfoot River Valley and noticed that he saw these trumpeter swans in his notebook. So through a partnership with many different organizations, trumpeter swans have been nesting now in the Blackfoot since 2011. So the impetus for our organizations, and Ryan will talk a little bit more about this one, but obviously a legacy of mining, not unique to Montana, but really all over the West, and minerals leaching into the river, unsustainable grazing practices. A large portion of the Blackfoot watershed used to be owned by corporate timber companies. They own no land anymore, which is a process that we've been involved in, but unsustainable timber harvesting, weeds. The annual tuber hatch that occurs every midsummer around July. So increasing recreational pressures, which really have been part of our story since the 70s. This wasn't something, I think BBCTU incorporated in 1987, the Blackfoot Challenge in 1993, but this dealing with public-private partnerships in terms of recreation interests of Missoulians or people from all over the world coming up the Blackfoot, and having to balance the use of these resources with individuals who've been living here for generations is a story and a partnership that's been evolving since the 70s, which, if anyone's going to dinner tonight with Land and Hank, you will hear all about. So recreation pressures, and also development pressures. People who I work with at the Blackfoot Challenge talk about how they saw the Bitterroot Valley changing, and this large intact landscape being fragmented, and wanted to try to get ahead of that in the Blackfoot watershed. So in the late 1980s and early 1990s, people started to get together and talk about, do they see these resource threats happening the same that others do? Is there something that we could do about it? And does it make sense to form some organizations that could help coordinate a response to those issues? So numerous community meetings were held. This is our chairman, Jim Stone, who's a rancher in Ovando, Rolling Stone Ranch, at a community meeting in Hillville. And that really spawned the beginning of the Blackfoot Challenge. So BBCTU, and Ryan will talk more about this, with the focus on the fisheries, the Blackfoot Challenge took it to a ridgetop to ridgetop approach. So looking at all the lands within the Blackfoot, unrolling a map that was much more complicated much less complicated than the map of the land ownership is today, and said, wow, that's going to be a challenge to get all of those individuals talking together. When I talked to Len Lindbergh, he says it wasn't such a matter of, or it wasn't just a matter of getting public agencies and private landowners to begin talking to one another and working together. Private landowners weren't talking to one another, and public agencies weren't talking to one another, and even sometimes individuals within public agencies weren't talking to one another. So there was a lot of need for improvement for just communication if we wanted to take a more holistic approach to looking at the Blackfoot River watershed. So the mission of the Blackfoot Challenge is to coordinate efforts to conserve and enhance the natural resources and the rural way of life in the Blackfoot watershed for present and future generations. And so this is really the bread and butter of what the Blackfoot Challenge is, this community-based approach, which is what it's come to be called now. I don't know if they had a name for it back in the 70s, but it's increasing in popularity, and we often get asked, we love the Blackfoot Challenge, you guys have had so much success, how, we have to put together a plan, and we have 1 year to do it, how can we do what you guys are doing in the Blackfoot? And there's some guidelines that we follow, but the biggest piece is that this takes a lot of time because it rests on relationships and partnerships. And you can't rush trust, and you can't rush credibility, and that's what this is all built upon. So these are some of the guidelines that we really try to follow. So first is inviting participation by all stakeholders. It's an inclusive process. Everyone who has a stake in an issue is invited to the table, always, and that invitation is always open. If people don't want to accept it, that's their choice, and that happens. But it's a very inclusive process. So the door is always open, public-private partners. Every public agency that manages land in the Blackfoot watershed has a seat on the board of the Blackfoot Challenge, and always will. It's written into the bylaws. And then we lead with community values. So, and science supports the conversation. So this is an important nuance, I think. To start the conversations off, as biologists, we're coming into the valley and recognize how amazingly intact this landscape is and the importance of conserving these species, that they weren't going to make that much headway if they began with their issue. So we need to become a part of the community, hear what maybe those local issues are which are important first, choose to tackle those, get to know the people that you're working with, and then incorporate science as it supports the conversation, if that makes sense. A rancher from Helmville, David Mannix, brought the 80-20 rule to the Blackfoot Challenge. And so this is essentially saying, let's start off the conversation by focusing on what we agree on. So what are our shared values? I think it's human nature to begin the conversation with where we don't agree, right? And immediately launch into conflict. Let's try to put whatever we don't agree on the back burner until we can agree on something. Let's focus on what we agree on first. So some of those early-ish conversations in the Blackfoot, I know one of our first committees was weeds. Number one, public common enemy, kind of easy to rally around that. That gives us an opportunity to get to know one another. And I mean get to know one another on a more personal level. So not just professionally, but actually, recognizing that our kids go to school together, or that we have common interests, or that, you screwed this up, but you owned it, and you came back and you apologized, so it gives you an opportunity to kind of work on something, getting to know one another on a personal level first. And then later, you can have that trust, credibility to work on the 20%. That's a real, it's simple, but it's maybe not easy. And then proper pacing. This is one that Greg Nidecker, I think I first learned from Greg Nidecker. You can't get ahead of your partners. Again, all this stuff, it sounds so easy, right? But it's kind of tricky. So if you're making a decision, somebody's not in the room, you can't really make that decision. Because if they come to the table later and say, you know what, the decision that you made, it compromises my values. I'm not in support of that, then you aren't gonna have a solution that really could last the long term. So what we try to do is take it slow. And so that's why you can't put together a plan in 1 year. You have to get to know the people that you're working with, and you might not know the people who are affected by an issue for years, or for a while. And including a coordinating framework, this is the Blackfoot Challenge. So once you get together, you decide what you should do. There are 14 staff, I think, now on the Blackfoot Challenge. When I started, it was 7, so we've grown quite a bit. But who's going to coordinate that work in the interim? And that's what our organizations do. So we think that by following this process, you build that trust, the credibility, you build personal relationships with individuals, and that is how you can get to lasting solutions on the ground. So that's kind of the caring base. And then here, this is just emphasizing that this is about people. This is about knowing how to work with people. I've met some of the most amazing individuals through this work. I've been here for 6 years now, and we have board meetings once a month, and it is always just a real treat for me to watch the leaders in the Blackfoot Challenge interact in that room and how they lead a conversation. And it really requires committing to listening to people that you don't agree with, really hearing them out and trying to understand where they're coming from. And it requires leaving your ego at the door. I mean, these are some of the most humble people, landlord especially, some of the most humble people that I've ever met. And I think that it's because of individuals like that this is so successful. Okay, so I'm just going to briefly go through just what are the committees that have evolved over the lifespan of the Blackfoot Challenge. Weeds, like I mentioned, an easy earlier rallying point. An issue that was very important at the foundation of the Blackfoot Challenge, and still is today. There's still weeds, we're still working on this one. Our education committee, just a variety of programs to getting youth outside. Patty Bartlett is the chair of our education committee from Sealy Lake Elementary. Unfortunately, we had to cancel our swan release that was going to happen on Thursday because of the fires this year. Water, recognizing the multiple stakeholders that have that need access to the water, including irrigators, including fish. So coming up with a drought response plan, a voluntary drought response plan for individuals to participate in years like this one. I think we hit our low flow trigger of 700 CFS on August 10th this year, and are hovering above 500, but we just sent out a notice this morning that we are not going to activate. I mean, it's all voluntary, right? But we're not going to activate the drought plan this year just because of the very serious situations happening in Blackfoot right now with the fires, and people need to be able to exercise their water rights if they would like. Wildlife has really been a cornerstone for partnership building. Obviously, being a part of such an intact landscape, these ranches have wolves, grizzly bears, lynx, well, not lynx, but at their doorstep. And so some of these critters are coming onto their ranches, and it's been a joint fact-finding, learning where those conflicts are occurring. Conflicts can range anywhere from a bear digging up tulips in your garden to actually killing a person. And so what are the strategies that we can utilize to reduce those conflicts? So stuff like just on the far left, just using radio telemetry on collared bears, knowing where they are in proximity to cattle that are out grazing in the summer on public allotments. This simple electric, just one line of electric fence with that's called flag reed, waving in the wind, will actually scares wolves away. So putting that around calving areas. Electric fences. We've installed, I think, over 18,000 feet of electric fences in the Blackfoot around calving areas, around beehives, which are common conflict sites. And then we actually also compost livestock in cooperation with Department of Transportation. We've been doing that for a while. Our Conservation Strategies Committee, like I mentioned, Plum Creek Timber Company no longer owns any land in the Blackfoot. We've been partnering with the nature. I realize I'm breezing through this because we don't have a lot of time. There's a lot of meat I could get into, but just that essentially as development, as real estate property values have increased over the years because of development pressures, Plum Creek Timber Company has been selling land. And we have partnered with the Nature Conservancy to follow what we call just a community-driven disposition process for figuring out what the permanent ownership of those lands would be, such that it protects natural resources and the rural way of life in the Blackfoot. And this is, or if you go back one, this is just a map showing all of the, I think this includes conservation easements in the valley as well. So all the protected lands in the Blackfoot, and the majority of that was previously Plum Creek Timber Company land. And then also just better education about conservation easements. I remember talking to Michael Sedevendemi, one of the first executive director of the Blackfoot Challenge, and conservation easements was one tool that people were using at the beginning. You know, conservation wasn't necessarily the driving the conversation. Conversation was the outcome of this process. And I think that's, I enjoy hearing that perspective. It's about, you know, our organization exists to really help the community understand what's going on, get the information they need, and then they make the choice. Conservation has been a choice over the last 20 years in the Blackfoot. And then our forestry program, which really kicked up in 2008 after the Jocko Lakes fire, a year that was similar to this one, working with private landowners to decrease wildfire risk in the WUI, or the wildland urban interface. So very relevant in years like this one. And so these are just a variety of our different committees. You know, they kind of come and go depending on what the needs of the community are and responding to the needs of the community. And across all this is a great quote that Ryan had by land, but how do we measure our success? Well, the Blackfoot River is really that barometer. Which brings us back to Ryan.
I'm not as tall as Sarah, so I'm gonna do this. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about the Blackfoot Trout Unlimited chapter, and our focus is on, our mission specifically is to restore and conserve the cold water fishery of the Blackfoot and its tributaries. And we are working with a whole host of public and private landowners. We have over 260 different private landowners we work with, but you know, the Forest Service, BNRC, BLM, the Fish and Wildlife Service, Fish, Wildlife and Parks, Five Valleys Land Trust, you name it. We're trying to include everybody in this work. And to kind of break down our mission a little bit more, when I'm talking about the cold water fishery, I'm talking specifically our native trout. So that would be our bull trout and our cutthroat. And these are, they're kind of like the canary in the coal mine example. So their presence or their absence is an indicator to us of how well the habitat is functioning. So these fish have higher habitat quality needs than, say, rainbow or brown trout. They require the 4 C's, so cold, clean, complex, meaning lots of wood in the streams, undercut banks, those types of things, pools, deep pools, and then connected. So we've actually documented fish moving 90 miles to get to where they need to spawn in the river, or out of the river into the tributaries, I should say. So they can't have dams blocking their way, they need to be able to move freely. So to talk more about, when I talk about the restoring the Blackfoot River and its tributaries, when people think about restoration in the Blackfoot, a lot of times on tours, people are surprised when we take them to a little tributary that you can step across. You know, we have this beautiful river, this iconic Blue Ribbon trout stream, but the 1,900 miles of perennial tributaries that feed the river are where we're spending our time. These are the lifeblood to the river. This is where the spawning and recruitment is occurring. So, as Sarah mentioned, the health of the river is directly related to the watershed, and the health of our tributaries is going to show up in the fishery in the Blackfoot River. In Montana, we have a wild trout policy, which means we don't stock any trout in our rivers and streams, so everything is self-sustaining. So we need, these are wild trout, they need really good habitat if they're going to make it. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to restore habitat, but we have this huge watershed, 1.5 million acres, 132 miles of river, 1,900 miles of stream. Where would you start? And we have this advantage where for the last 28 years, Fish, Wildlife and Parks, the Forest Service, and others have been out collecting data. So they're out looking at these streams and collecting fish and doing red counts, which tells you where fish are spawning. They're collecting water quality samples. They're doing habitat inventory work. So they've actually inventoried over 260 different streams. And they've taken all this data, and we found that, you know, we are not immune to threats to trout in the Blackfoot. I mean, these are the usual suspects of habitat damage that affect trout. We have issues that Sarah laid them out, and but the neat thing is instead of pointing the finger, we're trying to figure out how to work together to improve these and have a working landscape, but have these trout populations do really well. So we've taken all this data and we've actually developed a restoration action plan, which is, this is one of the first ones we did way back, but it's our roadmap. It's telling us where we should focus our efforts, where we should spend our time to have the biggest bang for our buck. You know, we have limited time, we have limited resources. We need to really focus in on those areas where we can make a difference. So we have basically broken down the tributaries into high, moderate, and low categories. And again, it's telling us again where we're going to be the most efficient with our time. And the types of work that we do, talk about channel restoration first. So this is a spring creek that fed the North Fork of the Blackfoot River. So you look at this and you see an over-widened, shallow system that's not going to be supporting trout. The temperatures are high, there's a lot of sediment. So we came in, this was a project we did in 2006, and we restored 18,000 feet of this spring creek. We did this by bringing in sod mats and deepening pools and adding wood. Another example in the same area, this is on a different spring creek, kind of before and after again, just restoring. Sometimes it's hard to, if you keep your eye on that tree, go back maybe, keep your eye on the tree, the big pea pine there. So just restoring these systems back to where they can function on their own. And the biggest, I mean, we're directly impacting the spring creeks, but then we have restored 10 different spring creeks in the Blackfoot that feed the North Fork of the Blackfoot River. And we're decreasing these temperatures back down. These native trout, they want to be under 60 degrees water temperature. So we're getting back into those temperatures where these fish can do well. And when you add up 10 CFS on this stream, 8 CFS, cubic feet per second. So when you add up all this water, you have about 50 cubic feet per second of water that's now, cold water, that's now coming into the North Fork of the Blackfoot River. And the North Fork is one of our most important bull trout cutthroat streams. And so in a year like this, when we have a severe drought, extreme temperatures, these spring creeks are going to be holding their own, and they're going to be contributing this cold water into the North Fork. Another example of some work we do, this is a bank on the Clearwater River. This is just north of Sealy. This is a project we worked with the Forest Service on 3 years ago. This was going to be one of our tour sites if things were different, but the Clearwater River, it's an important bull trout stream. There's actually western pearl shell mussel still living in this little stream as well. But we have this eroding bank. You have all this sediment coming in, there's no vegetation. This is right above the canoe trail, so it's a really visible spot. So we came in, like I said, 3 years ago and brought in wood and willows and basically brought back this riparian area. And now these banks are stable and you've eliminated the sediment source. Other examples of work that we do, we've been starting to do a lot of mine site restoration. So basically, we're looking at placer mines, so rock that's been piled on the floodplain. This is a little stream up in Lincoln. It's called Stonewall Creek, and there was 4,000 feet of channel that was lined with this rock. We moved, what was it, 300,000 yards of material out last fall. So you keep your eye on this mountain here, you get rid of all that rock. Your stream can then flood again, you have plants come in. So this is a little cutthroat stream. So all of this stuff, we're just trying to keep adding it to the list, and long term, it'll make a difference. We work with volunteers, we do a lot of revegetation. Most of our stream projects involve a re-veg component, and trying to get the school kids out, getting them involved, similar to the Challenge Education Program. We do a lot of work with private landowners. We're working, a lot right now with the Forest Service, but a large portion of private land. There are fish that are spawning, rearing, overwintering, and our program is all about trying to find win-win solutions where you can have grazing and you can have a healthy stream. So we work with landowners on off-site water. This is a solar system that pumps to this tank. Grazing management systems that involve riparian fencing, those types of things. So just trying to kind of make everything work in this rural landscape. Water conservation, obviously fish need water. So we work with landowners on lining leaky ditches, converting from flood to sprinkler. In Montana, we have a pretty neat tool where you can actually, in-stream flows are considered a beneficial use. So a landowner who was maybe using all of his water right to flood his meadow, we can help him, get him into a more efficient system, and maybe we can save half of his water, and that can be protected with an in-stream flow lease. So I won't get into the details, but basically it's a tool to, again, have a win-win. You can have water in your stream, and you can have water for irrigation. And we have conserved almost 50 CFS, or 23,000 gallons per minute of water by doing these projects. Going hand in hand with irrigation, a lot of times when irrigators are pulling water from a stream or a river, they have an open ditch, meaning that there is not anything at the front of it to stop fish from going down. So we have installed, I think we have 39 different fish screens now. These are just some different examples. We have drums, the two top pictures, hydro-powered or electric drums. We have self-cleaning paddle wheels, picture on the left, and then this other, it's a turbulent fountain, which, anyways, we have a bunch of different examples of fish screens, and these are designed to pull landowners' water right, but keep fish out of the ditch and in the river where they belong. This is just a map showing you where the fish screens are located in the Blackfoot. And I don't know if this video will work, just to kind of show you one in action. Nope, it's not gonna work, that's all right. Maybe?
Yeah, escape out of it.
That's okay. Fish passage, I mentioned connectivity. These fish need to be able to move great distances to where they need to spawn or where they need to overwinter. So we work with landowners on upgrading stream crossings. So you look at a culvert like this, it was undersized, and so basically in the spring when you have a lot of water coming through there, it's like a fire hose. And over time, it's shooting enough water out that the stream starts to cut below it. And then you have a barrier because it's too high for the fish to jump from the stream up through the culvert. So this is actually a project we worked with the Forest Service on almost 10 years ago, but just came in with a new bridge, and so you get your fish passage back, and then you eliminate that channel impairment, all that pressure point on the stream there. We also do, not everything gets replaced with the bridge. There's oftentimes the size of the stream lends itself to a culvert. So this is we just took out this undersized culvert and went with it's a bottomless arch. And you basically are trying to make the new structures you put in the stream invisible to the stream and to the fish, and the tailed frogs and everything else moving in these streams. We do road decommissioning work in those areas where the community, for the most part, is on board. It's definitely a tough issue. The Forest Service have identified roads like this one. On the left, there was a road that ran right up this little bull trout stream, and you cross the stream 5 times. A lot of sediment coming in. They actually moved the road into the upland, so you still have your access for people, but you eliminate all this sediment from cars coming through. So this is the before and after. The stream is somewhere in here, but we just try to restore these systems so that the roads are gone and the sediment source is gone. Fish passage at irrigation diversions. This is a small dam that we were also going to look at our tour today. This was on Trail Creek. This is right by Double Arrow. We worked with the Double Arrow Landowners Association and the owners of Double Arrow. And this was blocking access for bull trout and cutthroat 18 miles upstream. So on the left, you can see there's this green, it's actually a fish ladder. So that was the temporary solution, but Fish Life and Parks has shown that these fish avoid it. They don't move through them. So this was basically a barrier. So we came in, and this is what it looks like now. Just took that out, built a little river step pool through there. And it was part of a larger project where the irrigators can still get their water. There's a fish screen in the ditch. This ditch actually is what irrigates the Double Arrow Golf Course, for those of you that are familiar with it. So not everything's out on a ranch. There's also, with Sealy in play, there's other opportunities there as well. So this is a long-term investment. This is BBCTU's 30th year. There are several board members in the room today, past and present. With our partners, we've been able to invest about $15 million on the ground for restoration, and that means jobs. We estimate about 220 jobs. This is good for our economies. Next slide. And you know, we hire local contractors. We hire guys that live in Ovando and Sealy that are actually moving dirt for us, or we're buying our fish screens and our pipe from a supplier right in Sealy Lake. But just getting these local communities involved is what makes this program sustainable, I think. And all of this work is translating to a cleaner river system, and our angler days. We estimate about 40,000 angler days. So this is good for businesses like Trixie's and the Stray Bullet and the B&Bs throughout the Blackfoot. So to get back to, again, the tributaries being the health, or they're the lifeblood to the river, and how well our fisheries are doing in the Blackfoot River is going to be directly correlated to how well our tributaries are doing. So this is West Slope cutthroat numbers in the middle, or I'm sorry, we're at bull trout. So we're talking about the number of spawning nests that we have seen in the three main bull trout streams, Copper, Monitor Creek, and the North Fork. So they started doing red counts in 1989, and somehow the wrong slide's in here. But I'm evacuated, so you have to give me a break. So basically, we are up close to 300. So that's about an 800% increase in bull trout numbers. And that's in the face of some pretty severe drought years. And it's a similar story for cutthroat. And so again, with these fish, being our best indicators, we feel happy with where things are going. We learned something not to do on every project, I can tell you that much. But it's really a partnership effort, and we're hoping we can keep this thing going for at least another 30 years. So Sarah and I are going to be here for questions, but thank you for your time. Any questions? Yeah.
How are the present fires affecting your work at the moment?
So the question was, how are the fires affecting our work? So in the Powell and Missoula County, we are on stage 2 restrictions, meaning we're basically shut down. We had projects that were supposed to be done and happening right now, and they are on hold. So it's definitely slowing things down, but big picture, we'll just have more to do next year. So.
Okay, thank you.
Yes?
Follow up to that, what is the long-term effect of the fires on the work that you've done?
Yeah.
It's hitting the North Fork.
Yeah.
What do you expect the long-term effect to be?
Well, I'm gonna be positive for now. Fires do have they have a natural role in the ecosystem. That Canyon Creek fire that was in 1988 in the North Fork burned pretty hot, and our bull trout have been increasing since. We've seen other examples like up in Copper Creek where you see a big nutrient influx in a positive way. There's other areas that are going to burn pretty hot, and there's going to be some impacts. It's going to be a tough year, but I'm optimistic that, you know, what we've been doing to increase connectivity so these fish can go elsewhere for the time being, and we may have to get involved with some. I know the forest is going to do some heavy rehab on stuff, but I'm going to be optimistic and say we're just going to keep doing what we're doing. So.
That's a lot of work. What's your volunteer base?
We have a great group of volunteers. We rely on local schools. But really, I would say, I can't emphasize it enough. When you have the Forest Service and the Fish and Wildlife Service and, you know, Fish, Wildlife Parks and all of these other biologists, we're all working together. And then we have really qualified contractors that know what they're doing and that have really fair prices. So it's just a team effort. Volunteers play an important role, like with revegetation, but the most of it is, again, it's just, we have a really good group of contractors and consultants that know what they're doing, so.
Are they largely from the region?
Yes, every consultant that does like our stream designs, our culvert upgrades, they are all in Montana. And of the 6 contractors that are on our list, half of them live in the Blackfoot, and the other 3 live either Missoula, Eureka, or Helena. So, yeah. Yeah.
The creeks that you're restoring, are they wider and shallower due to human impact?
So the question was, the creeks that we are restoring, are they wider and shallower due to human impact? And I would say, in the majority of cases, yes, they are. What's that?
What was that?
We have issues where channels have been straightened. So, you know, years back when people needed to grow more hay, they would move a channel to the edge of a meadow and then it caused it to unravel. Sometimes these systems are so sensitive that if you overgraze them, they can't heal themselves, so they just keep getting wider and wider. But the neat thing is I think we've been able to, for most cases, find a way to show landowners that they can still graze or they can still hay, but we can maybe raise the elevation of the water in the channel and narrow things up, and they're going to get more productivity. We actually did a project on Jim Stone's ranch. He's the chairman of the challenge, and his channel was 10 feet deep and just one long straight thing. We actually restored it out in his meadow, and he went from 2.5 tons of hay to over 4 tons of hay by doing the work. So again, it's trying to find that win-win of having both. Hi, yeah.
I just will attest to the success. I live on Bear Creek,
Yes.
and it was completely pushed off to the side of the mountain for grazing, and it was restored, and it's beautiful. It's wonderful. It's really working, and they've done a great job. So I can attest to one success anyway.
That's great. Yes.
Yeah, I was wondering, you had the one example about the shallow tributary, and which wasn't good for restoring the fish run.
Yeah.
How do you make decisions? How do you make priorities in terms of what you're going for? Because I can imagine, for example, in that situation, there are certain little creatures that thrive in that kind of natural environment.
You bet.
How do you sort through those kinds of, how do you make priorities?
So the question was, how do we make priorities when we are looking at restoring a stream? And the question, that overwide spring creek. So you're right, there's maybe some amphibians or other species that are gonna do well in that shallow environment. But what we do is, like on that example, we base the width of the new stream channel on what's called a reference reach. So it's a section of stream in that same area or just downstream that's functioning well, that has clean sediment, has stable banks, all these different variables. So we take those dimensions and then we extrapolate them to this reach we want to restore. but it can't just all be about trout, right? So you think about that was like a 50-foot wide stream that went down to maybe 10 feet. And then we don't fill in the areas on the other side. Those are left open, and we have little connecting areas where there's water that comes from the actual channel to these back bays. And so you still have your amphibian habitat. A lot of there's bugs that maybe don't do as well, but they are more tolerant of high sediment loads that aren't natural. So when you get your sediment levels on your stream gravels back to what they should be, then you have like your mayflies and your caddisflies and your stoneflies come back, and those are a really good indicator of water quality as well. So it's a balance, and we're trying to, not that we're not trying to play God, but we're trying to take our cue from Mother Nature where it is functioning well and bring that as part of the design, if that makes sense. Okay.
You had a slide that showed the number of angler days and mentioned it was approaching 40,000. How is that trending? Up, down, constant?
It's trending up. Yeah. I haven't seen, they do it, I think, every other year. But yeah, a lot of people love to fish the Blackfoot. Any other questions? Great. Thank you guys so much.
I have no personal experience with DECQ. I'm a New Englander originally, and back in Connecticut I started the Farmington Valley chapter of Trout Unlimited, and was proud of the fact that it grew to be the second largest TU chapter in New England. We had 450 members. We had monthly meetings. We had fundraisers, and at the end of the year, we'd make about $10,000, and we didn't know what to do with it, but we had it. So then I come out here, and I feel a little swaggery because of that. And I joined the big Blackfoot chapter of TU, and I go to my first board meeting up at Bluebird Forest in Greeno, and I go in there, and there's 11 guys sitting around the table, and 3 or 4 guys from different agencies like the Forestry Service and Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, and BLM. And they start talking. I'm waiting for my turn to kind of give my own pitch. And the first thing they do is they go through the financial records and say, okay, well, we got $750,000 in the bank in CDs. And it's like, oops. And let's see, and in our project pipeline, we've got the guy from BLM says, well, I got $2.5 million that we're going to grant you for restoring these creeks over here. And then Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, so we have $850,000 ready to come to you for a 2-year project. We do this, we do that. And I realized I better just keep my mouth shut. It was an amazing difference. The work they did, they were making science. They weren't executing known techniques. They were, and still do. They developed techniques that aren't known, aren't tested, and they test them and they develop them and they improve them. Those various diversion machines you saw with paddle wheels and some solar powered, a lot of those are conceptualized and tested out here and become standards elsewhere. Very impressive group. Okay. At the risk of repeating myself, we're now going to hear from Stephanie Ambrose Tubbs. The introduction I gave before still holds. Just to save time, Stephanie, it's all yours.
So I would also like to say a word in praise of the big Blackfoot TCU chapter. If that's right. And that is, I was at the landowners tour one year when they were celebrating some of their major accomplishments, and I remember Jim Stone saying, okay, now it's time for a group hug. And the people were like, that's where we draw the line. So I am going to give a paper that is newly written. Yeah, Jack, can you give me a hand over here? I'm dying to have him do my microphone. Jack and I are old friends from the trail, and he actually does have a friendship medal with him if you're interested in seeing that. Can everyone hear me? Good afternoon, or should I say good evening at this point, and welcome to the Presbyterian Church. I'm honored to be with you today, and I would like to thank our firefighters and first responders who are working so hard to put this awful season behind us. Thanks to the Alpine artists and to Jenny Royer for the invitation to participate today. This summer I hiked up Man Gulch to several crosses which marked where the victims of the Man Gulch fire fell. The terrain was steep, it was stiflingly hot, and already so dry that the fire warnings had been issued. Needless to say, it gave me a whole new appreciation for the story Norman Maclean tells in Young Men and Fire. I feel a special connection to Maclean because my father-in-law knew the Maclean family, and because my brother is someone who could legitimately claim fly fishing is his religion. Mainly, I feel connected to Norman because of his passion for rivers, particularly the big Blackfoot River. It has been my good fortune to know several of the cantankerous characters that played a part in the history of the Blackfoot Valley. Some I know personally, and others I know because of their stories. Folks with names like Hobnail Tom, Lan Lindbergh, Jim Stone, Trixie, Big Nelson, Little Nelson, Scotty Brown, Woody the River Guard, and Ovando Hoyt, and the name Kleinschmidt rings a bell. Many of these names are familiar because they stayed on the map. This afternoon, I would like to talk about a name that all but disappeared from the map, but that signifies something important and intangible, something that speaks to the fact that the best heroes are the ones who are human, the ones who have a heart. And so I titled this, What's in a Name? Meriwether Lewis and the Blackfoot River Valley. The Prairie of the Knobs, or Knob Plains, also known as Blackfoot or Stevens Prairie, located near Ovando in Powell County, Montana, near the Blackfoot River, was named by Meriwether Lewis. After dividing the party and heading west so he could explore the Marias River, Lewis wrote, "These plains I call the Knob Plains, or the Prairie of the Knobs, from the number of knobs being irregularly scattered through it." In addition, he observed, "Up this valley and creek a road passes to Dearborn's River, and thence to the Missouri. The road followed a river called the River to the Road to the Buffalo, used by most of the tribes on the western side of the Continental Divide. The young Nez Perce men guiding Lewis at this point told him he could now go ahead on his own. Previously, if the expedition had been looking for the shortest passable route to the Pacific without the added chore of having to locate the source of the Missouri and securing horses, this would have been an excellent shortcut." A little bit more on the Kukalorishkit River, which I'm probably mispronouncing, or the river to the road to the Buffalo, the Blackfoot River, the Buffalo Road River. It is a Nez Perce name for a tributary of the Clark Fork River in Missoula County, Montana. According to Roberta Cheney's Names on the Face of Montana, quote, "Before the white man came, there was a trail along the Blackfoot where the road now runs, which was used for the annual buffalo hunt. It was called the Kukalorishkit, or the River of the Road to the Buffalo. The Nez Perce, Shoshone, Flatheads headed east on it each year, hoping to avoid their Blackfoot enemies. White men recorded the river as the Big Blackfoot Fork on an 1865 map." Excuse me. After separating from Clark, his, quote, "worthy friend and companion," to explore the Marias River in July of 1806, Lewis headed up for the confluence of the Blackfoot and Clark Fork rivers, and then proceeded up the Blackfoot to a gap, now misnamed the Lewis and Clark Pass, because Clark never saw it, and then onto the Dearborn River, the Great Falls, and finally to the Marias River. According to the Nez Perce Indians who guided him to the Kukalorishkit, quote, "The river was a very well-beaten track. We could not now miss our way, and as they were afraid of meeting with their enemies, the Minataris, they could not think of continuing with us any longer, end quote. Lewis made sure his guides were supplied with meat. I directed the hunters to turn out early in the morning and endeavor to kill some of the more meat for these people, whom I was unwilling to leave without giving them a good supply of provision after their having been so obliging as to conduct us through those tremendous mountains, which he spells tremendious. While wintering at Fort Clatsop, the captains determined on their way home the Corps would split up so Clark could explore the Yellowstone River and Lewis could investigate the Marias River. The Marias, a river named by Lewis for his cousin, Maria Wood, quote, "The hue of the water of this turbulent and troubled stream, but illy comport with the pure and celestial virtues and amiable qualifications of that lovely fair one." He also noted, "It was a noble river, one destined to become, in my opinion, an object of contention between the two great powers of America and Great Britain, with respect to the adjustment of the northwesterly boundary of the former, and it will become one of the most interesting branches of the Missouri in a commercial point of view." It was a risky decision to divide the Corps, but one which Thomas Jefferson likely would have approved so long as they did not risk their own lives and the accounts of the explorations contained in the journals thus far. Why split the Corps in this most dangerous region? As Lewis and Clark scholar Joe Musselman writes, quote, "The overriding outcome of the expedition had been the discovery that 300 years worth of speculation and exploration had come down to one simple reality. There never was a riverine northwest passage across the continent after all. The intricate and dangerous plan the two captains had cooked up between them was their concerted effort to achieve such salutary results from their journey that the American people would forget the old fantasy of the Northwest Passage. Therefore, on July 3rd, 1806, at Travelers' Rest, the Corps divided, with Lewis taking 9 men, 17 horses, and indubitably one large black dog, whom we now know was named Seaman, also known as Scannon, a Newfoundland dog. He accompanied the Corps of the Discovery to the Pacific and was believed by some to have returned with his owner, Meriwether Lewis, to St. Louis. Most likely, Lewis purchased him before he left Washington, D.C. for Pittsburgh in 1803. According to his Ohio journal, Lewis paid a substantial amount, or half a month's wages, for the dog whom he, quote, "prized much for his docility and qualifications generally for my journey." He rejected a Shawnee Indian's offer of 3 beaver skins for his pet, writing, "Of course there was no bargain. I had given $20 for the dog myself." Indeed, Seaman's qualifications generally would prove most valuable to the expedition. Intelligent, loyal, and strong, contemporary Newfoundlands are black in color, although 19th century Newfoundlands were sometimes mixed in color. They weigh up to 150 pounds and stand 30 inches in their prime. A Newfoundland's coat is thick and water resistant. They are accomplished swimmers. Their long tails function as rudders, while their webbed feet and massive chests power them through the water. Also known as sea dogs, Newfoundlands rescued men fallen overboard and hauled lines and nets for fishermen. Descriptions of Newfoundland's standards state, quote, "A good specimen of this breed has dignity and proud head carriage." Some speculate that the breed originated in Europe because today's Newf so closely resembles the Great Pyrenees breed. The Newfoundland was indigenous to North America and often lived with Indian tribes along the coast and on the Central Plains. Ben Franklin and Samuel Adams both owned Newfoundlands. Typical of his breed, Seaman sought above all to protect and please his master. On the Ohio River in September of 1803, he and Lewis witnessed a gray squirrel migration swimming en masse across the river. "I made my dog take as many each day as I had occasion for. They were fat, and I thought them, when fried, a pleasant food. Many of these squirrels were black. They swim very light on the water and make pretty good speed. My dog was of the Newfoundland breed, very active and docile. He would take the squirrel in the water when swimming and bring them to me by his mouth to the boat. Seaman's skill as a hunter also impressed Sergeant Ordway many times. Ordway's journal noted Seaman retrieving geese, deer, and on April 25, 1805, he witnessed the dog catching, killing, and bringing in a pregnant pronghorn as it swam across the river. More than once, Seaman protected the expedition at risk of his own life. On May 29, 1805, he saved the crew when a buffalo charged into camp, quote, and was within 18 inches of the heads of some of the men who lay sleeping before the sentinels could alarm him or make him change his course. Still more alarmed, he now took direction immediately towards our lodge, passing between 4 fires and with a few inches of the heads of one range of men as they yet lay sleeping. When he came near the tent, my dog saved us by causing him to change his course a second time, which he did by turning a little to the right and was quickly out of sight. Many times he protected the party from fierce grizzlies. On June 28, 1805, Lewis observed that, quote, they come close around our camp every night, but they have never yet ventured to attack us, as our dog gives us timely notice of their visits. He keeps constantly patrolling all night. Seaman endured every trial or chapter of accidents that the men did, except perhaps homesickness. Commenting on the terrible barred seed that penetrated their moccasins and leggings, Lewis noted, my poor dog suffers with them excessively. He is constantly biting and scratching himself as if in a rack of pain. The dog played his role in what one historian has called the traveling Lewis and Clark medicine show. Lewis did not hesitate to use him at a critical juncture in building up good feelings with the Shoshone. On August 17, 1805, Lewis reported the natives equally admired, quote, the appearance of the men, their arms, their canoes, our manner of working them, the black man York, and the sagacity of my dog. Sagacity, in this case, meaning quick of sight or thought. The dog's inevitable afflictions caused some genuine concern for Lewis. On a trip to the Spirit Mound in August of 1804, which is somewhere down by Nebraska, Seaman's suffering proved bad enough that Clark noted, at 2 miles further, our dog was so heated and fatigued, we was obliged to send him back to the creek. Later, Seaman endured a bite on the hind leg from a defensive beaver. Ordway reported on May 19, 1805, Seaman, Captain Lewis's dog, got bit by a beaver. A concerned Lewis noted, it was with great difficulty that I could stop the blood. I fear it will yet prove fatal to him. With regard to fleas, it is safe to assume no one suffered as much as Seaman during the dreary winter at Fort Clatsop. On April 24, 1805, Seaman did what most male dogs do from time to time and disappeared. According to Lewis, my dog has been absent during the last night and I was fearful that we had lost him altogether. However, much to my satisfaction, he joined us at 8 o'clock this morning. That spring, the Corps encountered immense herds of buffalo along the Missouri River. Lewis mentioned Seaman, quote, walking along the shore this evening, I met with a buffalo calf, which attached itself to me and continued to follow close at my heels until I embarked and left it. It appeared alarmed at my dog, which was probably the cause of its attaching itself to me. Sometime during the journey, Seaman became our dog, as described in the journals of Clark, Ordway, and Gass. He is mentioned some 44 times in the journals altogether. For readers of the journals, the idea of having a dog along made the story of the Lewis and Clark expedition take on qualities of an extended family camping trip, which it most certainly was not. Worthy to remember that the expedition was a military one, paid for, at least partially, by Congress, and each member from the captains on down had an important role to play. In that sense, Seaman was no different. He was expected to earn his keep, and as the above incidents certify, he did indeed earn his kibble. My father would often say that the question he was most asked concerning Lewis and Clark was, what happened to the dog? There is an answer, some call it apocryphal. It concerns an entry in a book by Timothy Alden, a collection of epitaphs and inscriptions, published in 1814. He found a dog collar in a museum in Alexandria, Virginia. The collar read, "The greatest traveler of my species. My name is Seaman, the dog of Captain Meriwether Lewis, whom I accompanied to the Pacific Ocean through the interior of the continent of North America." Alden included a note describing the dog's reaction to the sad end of Meriwether Lewis. Apparently, he would not leave Lewis's gravesite and died there of dehydration and malnourishment. A historian I know, James Holmberg, asserts that the timing of this evidence, within 5 years of Lewis's death, provides a credible indication of Seaman's fate. Holmberg has viewed letters indicating that Clark presented the collar to the Masons Lodge of Alexandria, Washington, in their museum in 1812. No trace of this collar remains extant. It is certain that Lewis and Seaman shared a strong emotional attachment. When Seaman was nearly stolen by the Waclalar Indians on the lower Columbia River, it so enraged Lewis, he dispatched 3 men in pursuit with orders to fire upon the thieves if there was any resistance or hesitation in returning his dog. The last mention of Seaman comes in Lewis's entry for July 15, 1806. Quote, "The mosquitoes continue to infest us in such a manner that we can barely exist. My dog even howls with the tortures he experiences from them. They are almost insupportable. They are so numerous that we frequently get them in our throats as we breathe." Readers did not learn of the name of Lewis's dog until the publication of Sergeant Ordway's journal in 1916. The editor of the journal just transcribed it in 3 ways: Scannon, Seaman, S-E-M-O-N, and Scammon. Earlier editions of the journal did not mention the dog. Lewis and Clark scholar Donald Jackson corrected the mistake in 1985 when researching place names along the trail. According to his wife, Kathy, Jackson reasoned that because Lewis and Clark named so many geographical features after members of the Corps, it seemed logical to assume they would eventually get around to naming one for the dog. Expecting to find Seaman's Creek was actually Scannon's Creek, Jackson writes that he was mildly startled when he found, upon close inspection of handwriting samples, the stream was named Seaman's Creek because the dog's name was Seaman. Thanks to Jackson's diligence, we now know Seaman's Creek was named in honor of Lewis's beloved dog. The compelling part of the story, Meriwether Lewis and his dog, is the way Lewis's love for his dog proves that Lewis had a heart, that he was more than a walking encyclopedia of natural science and military protocol. History might have made him a hero, but his dog made him a human being, capable of compassion, empathy, and yes, even love. The fact that Lewis cared enough to name this little stream in honor of his dog speaks or barks volumes. I had just learned this, so I kind of stuck it in here. Lewis and Clark named features for each of the Corps members. 15 names were used twice. Lewis had 3 features named for him, and Clark had 4 features named for him. You had to do something really special to have a stream named after you, or as in the case of the Marias and the Judith, be fondly recalled by one of the captains. I like to think that on that hot July day in 1806, Seaman did what all large black dogs do in a stream, to this day. They splash and swim and run and shake and lie down in the coolness of the water with pure unleashed joy. And I believe that is why Lewis picked that spot to honor his connection to his 4-legged friend. It is also why I believe the name Seaman's Creek should be restored. Seaman matters because his story, celebrated in more than a dozen novels and in one 600-page poem, captures people. It gets them interested in the trail. And for younger audiences, it gets them enthused about getting out on the trail. As such, Seaman is a Pied Piper to the big outdoors, and we all know we need more of those. I have encountered many statues of seamen across the country, and if reachable, his nose is always polished from the thousands of fans patting him and saying, "Good dog." My favorite is a larger-than-life rendering of him constructed of 1,400 pounds of steel in Washburn, North Dakota, at the replica of Fort Mandan. He has that look that children of all ages recognize and adore, the look that says, "Sure, I'll be your friend." Despite varying accounts of his character, I hold no grudge against George Montour, the Hudson Bay scout and interpreter whose name now graces Seaman's Creek. Never mind that he has a hill, a mountain, a fire tower, a pass, a waterfall, a road, a monument, and a fishing access, all in his name. While some may have called him an enigma, others saw him as an 1887 version of Paul Revere. One of his more famous acquaintances recently had an Oscar-winning film made about him called The Revenant. Fittingly, Seaman does have a marker along the creek. You can find it off Highway 200 at the Montour Fishing Access. I encourage you to visit and to take a moment to appreciate the love and never-ending loyalty of a dog for his master, and the love and never-ending loyalty of a master for his best friend. Thank you.
Questions?
Yeah, I take questions. I don't have every answer about Lewis and Clark, but I'm sure somewhere in this audience we could attempt an answer. Thanks, Jack. Good luck.
I have to take it. Bye-bye.
See ya. I would just say that someone commented about, on the earlier presentation, about the movie being filmed in a different river valley than where it was set. And I understand why they did that, I think. I try to, when I see the movie, not think about that. But when it comes down to things like this story about Lewis and Clark and Montana, I really believe they should film the story of Undaunted Courage or Lewis and Clark in Montana or somewhere along the trail. I just don't think it's right to take the story up to Canada and film it up there. And I have many people that agree with me on that. There are some who are willing to argue the point, but there still is supposedly a miniseries in the works. And it's been backwards, forwards, sideways, but I'm still hopeful that it will get made and that hopefully they will film parts of it in Montana. Just seems right. Thank you.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Jenny Rohr, and I'm real excited to hear our next and final speaker. Juanita Vero is part of the family that is the Ebar L. And the Ebar L is a hidden guest ranch that many of us don't know that much about, and she's going to share a few things with us about it. They don't advertise, well, I might be speaking out of turn, but because people keep coming back and back and back over the years, and Juanita's going to fill us in on that history. Juanita Vero.
We're going to get through this really quick because I know I'm between you and your beer and it's already after 4. So, and this is going to be super casual and it feels awkward being behind a podium here. This is a little history about my family's dude ranch, and in the audience here is my dad and my godfather, both of whom were wranglers on the ranch. So my godfather was a wrangler there in what, 1955? Yeah, and then my dad followed 10 years later in 1965. So it has been around for a while. And it is a dude ranch, and so I got kind of hung up on the word dude. Maybe we would talk about that for a little bit. Some could say it's a derogatory term, but I've also heard that dude comes from a Scottish word for clothing, as in your duddies is clothing. And so by the late 1800s, apparently it became dude as to represent someone who was an urban dandy. And so thinking about late 1800s, you got Teddy Roosevelt, and he's come west, and you have the opening of the national parks, and now you have railroads, and there's this kind of nostalgic feel for the American West and cowboys, but it's now like safe enough for dudes to come out and be comfortable. And then after the war, after World War I, the country's prosperous enough now that people feel the urge to get out west, and there's automobiles and there's Western movies, and so dude ranches started springing up. And my great-grandparents were part of that. My great-grandfather, Orrin Potter, was actually an engineer on the the Pacific Northern Railroad, and he was coming from Chicago, and heading west to Seattle when he kind of stumbled upon Missoula, Montana, and fell in love with this area. Continued on to Seattle, where he met my great-grandmother, Gertrude, and this was in like the turn of the century, and he fell in love with her, and she with him, but they argued constantly. But he did say, he proposed to her, do you want to live in Mesopotamia or Montana? Because at that time, there's a lot of building going on from Baghdad to connect Syria and Turkey. And he was this engineer that could go anywhere. So she chose Montana, so they returned to Montana. And in 1906, purchased the land at the confluence of the Clearwater and Blackfoot Rivers. This is heritage and hospitality and hearts and honesty. And my great-grandfather, while he agrees with all of those things, he wasn't one for government and following the rules, and so he declined the offer to be part of the Dude Ranchers Association. So he just continued on his own. And I'm sorry, I'm getting lost here. So then the ranch, I guess, started. Well, we had the Depression and lost a lot of our employees to the war, and so lots of women and young men who were previous guests really kind of stepped up, and Jenny was kind of talking about how we don't do any advertising, and it's because we've had these generations of families return to us, and you're kind of like, what do you really do out there on a dude ranch? And it's like City Slickers meets Dirty Dancing with some Downton Abbey. I mean, really, we've been doing the same thing for 92 years. You get up, you eat breakfast, you ride, you come back, you eat lunch, you shoot, you float down the Blackfoot River, you drink, you eat dinner, you play softball, you hang around the campfire and drink some more. And we've been doing that exact same thing like Groundhog Day for 92 years. And it's magical. We didn't really set out to do it, but we didn't write a business plan or anything, but it is just kind of how our family has evolved. And now I'm just kind of rambling because I really don't know what you guys want to know about the Ebar Ranch. I mean, it's this tiny, tiny little ranch. We only take 45 people. We have 20 employees. We're only open June through September. We don't do any advertising. We don't have a sign. We don't have a website. I grew up not telling people where I live. Like, people ask where you're from, and my father would always say, Missoula, and so that's what we said, Missoula. He's like, it's Missoula County, you're not lying. So it's been a very private place, but at the same time, it's been, we've been so lucky to be part of the community, and the Blackfoot Challenge and Trout Unlimited have been huge in helping us with our management practices, and it's pretty exciting that Jimmy Stone and Lam Lindbergh, founding TU members, Jim Acer here and my father, we're all right there, and that's pretty special. I need some feedback from you guys, because otherwise I'm just gonna kind of ramble. Yeah, Carolyn.
Do you have some good stories about, you've had some remarkable guests over the years, and maybe you don't want to use names, but I mean, you have people from all around the world coming, and what do they value about coming out there?
I think like anyone coming to a dude ranch, was the same thing Teddy Roosevelt wanted. It's like, he's a sickly, bookish sort of New Yorker, and we have a lot of those. But, and the beautiful thing is that they come out to the ranch when they're about 13, 14 years old, and maybe they get into a little beer, or they fall in love with a wrangler or a cabin crew or what have you. And it's about that age they're also discovering the West. They're in the river on their own, and they're in the mountains on a horse by themselves. Like, they're not in a ring. They're not with their parents. I mean, their parents are around, but they're not really around. And so it's a time where these kind of cooped up urban kids can discover the West. And then what I really love is that they hang on to that. And we see, I'm old enough now, that I can see that 10, 15 years later, they come back either to work on the ranch or they come back to dedicate themselves to the work in the West or conservation in the West. Okay, a classic example, we had this guy from Virginia. Well, maybe I'll even back up a little further. I'll start with Mum McNulty. So he's this very stern, like what I knew him, like he had this shock of white hair and very frowny, very angry man. He's from Chicago. His family made their money in plaster, like at the World's Fair. So like and he had this special recipe for cement. And so I thought that you just stay away from Mum McNulty because you'll end up in cement. But he's a very angry man, but I thought he was angry, but he's just stern, and he loved to fish, and he loved the Blackfoot so much. And in the 80s, the Blackfoot was suffering because there's that, the Mike Horse Dam had failed in the early 70s, so 100,000 tons of toxic sludge had washed down the Blackfoot, killed the fishery, and it's no longer the fishery that he knew and loved. And Montana, didn't have the money to do research to figure out how do you do this the rehabilitation that needs to be done. Fish, Wildlife Parks didn't even have money for a baseline study. So Mum McNulty was like, well, how much money do you need? And it was just $15,000, and he wrote a check for $15,000 and kind of kickstarted big Blackfoot chapter of Trout Unlimited, also some fisheries biologists' careers with that. And that was a guest on the ranch who just loved coming to the ranch and coming to the Blackfoot. Another example would be like in the 90s, we had the guy from Virginia who drove me nuts. He'd show up every morning or every afternoon to go fishing or to go inner tubing, and he'd take spinning gear, like full on, like all this junk hanging around. I had never seen it. It's a Blackfoot. It's just like you're only supposed to fly fish, But this guy is like all these hooks and glitter and whatever hanging off this stuff. And he'd sit in his inner tube as we're floating down, and he'd be like yanking stuff back and forth. And I thought someone's going to lose their face, but he ended up hooking a fish that drug him up the stream, down the stream, back and forth, across the stream. Like he was just hanging on in his inner tube, and it was. I didn't know what it was, and finally he dragged it out of the water and lays it across his lap like a baby, and I didn't even know if it was a fish because it had this huge mouth and these spots, and it looked nothing like the little cornbread rainbow trout that I eat for breakfast. I wasn't even sure if it was a fish, seriously. And it ended up being a bull trout. I'd never seen one. I don't fish. I live 400 yards from the Blackfoot, but it's embarrassing. But he found out later there was a bull trout, and then understood that it was, educated himself and found out that you need to have Ryan seas, clean, cold, complex, connected water, and that fish was an indicator of that. And then this is the time when the mines are going in, or the proposed cyanide heap leach mines going in the headwaters in Lincoln, and he helps Clark Fork Coalition from Virginia and helps them stop the mine. Not just them, but the conservation orgs in the area stop that proposal. He finds out that there's bad investments made, or that there's not money with 7-Up Pete, and you guys all know the sordid history. But he was, an integral part of that, and again, just because of that moment, and then his time here on the ranch, and his access, I guess, to the river. Oh, and if you're talking about people that people know, Larry Page, or from Google, or Elon Musk, or Prince William, but all those three people are names that people hear, but it's not, those aren't our, I mean, Larry Page is allergic to horses and Elon Musk has better things to do, and we have only seen William since, once when he was 10. So those aren't our typical clients. Yes?
The thing, Juanita, that occurs to me when I think of the Ebar is that it's a sort of mystery place. You go there because you're famous somewhere and you want to get away from all that. And like Prince William, they send him there because nobody's going to get near him and he'll be safe and all the rest of it. And all those Thatcherites who come from the cabinet, those guys. What is it that you feel about all these people who want security in visibility, basically?
Yeah, and it is secure in the sense we have no locks on anything. There's no safes, there's no padlocks. My home is hand-forged, door latches, and I'm the only person on the ranch who doesn't own half a dozen firearms. But it's a safe place because it doesn't matter who you are, or what you do, or what your title is. I mean, George Osborne was there with his family.
Right.
But it just, that doesn't matter. What matters on the ranch, it goes back to what the dude ranchers, those 6 H's, it's, the heart and the hospitality. I mean, that's really, and I think a lot of guest ranches probably have that. It's like when you go on a camping experience, it doesn't really matter who you are. When you're on a camping experience or you're doing that like outdoor experiential ed sort of thing, doesn't matter who you are, what your title is, it's what your character is. And you can kind of learn what your character is when you're saddle sore or scared, or hungover, or exhausted and dehydrated. And so, but to your point, Michael, what makes the ranch special is that I think the family and the people that have been there. Like Jim Maester here, he was 17 when he started, and he's my godfather, and it's just been the kind of same people. We're all a little crazy, but it's the same people have been there since the beginning. And it's not just blood family, it's a collection family. Like we have, staff members who started out washing dishes in the 90s, and now he's our ranch manager. And we could not function without him. Anik.
Well, just recently you've opened yourselves up to a literary conference. Is that, as far as I know, that's the only time you've had conferences. I'm not sure, maybe you have others. But what kind of a change is that? Is that a change in direction? You're opening up the place to a different kind of clientele? What's behind deciding to?
And that was really fun. So having that conversation with Chris Dombrowski, she's talking about the Beargrass Writers Retreat, which is just awesome. It was just our 3rd year doing it this year with them. And when we started with Chris, we were like, he's trying to advertise this thing because he needs people there, but you can't tell him where it's at, And it's like I was like, well, yeah, Chris, you can use the photos, but don't tell anyone. Don't say Ebar El Ranch, But what's changed, I guess, with that was that they weren't coming. There's kind of like a dead period. It's the very end of August when all our families have gone back to school, and they don't ride very much. They're there to workshop and to write, and to hang out with writers. And so they're pretty. We don't really have to take care of them that much. We just need to make sure that they're comfortable and there's plenty of whiskey So I think, but you're right, and there's also, there's a foundation group for the University of Montana, the Grizzly Riders, that have been coming for 25 years. And that brings some different folks. But again, that's not the typical ranch experience, and so we do open it up to groups, but it has to be kind of in our off season in September, and they're a little different, because those are folks that come through for a couple days, and I think they probably have a little different experience, but they're there for a different reason. But it's fun. It's kind of fun to have that different energy. Yes?
Do you, or have you ever run cattle on the ranch?
Well, because we have just over 100 head of horses, we need all the grass we can get for our horses. We did. Well, Jim.
Yes, they did in times past. They had 100, 150.
I didn't even think it was that much, but okay. So, but it's just not quite the right landscape to run a lot of cattle on. We don't have the right grass to, it's not like Florida. So it's a little drier, and like I said, we need all the hay that we can put up and all our rangeland pasture that we have for our horses. And plus cattle, then you're into the cattle business, and we're just in the people business. My great grandparents, like, they didn't start out as a cattle ranch. They stumbled into a dude ranch because my great grandfather came back from the war, and he wanted, his buddies to come out and visit him from MIT and from wherever he was traveling in Europe, and they would come out, and back in those days, once you get out to the ranch, you have to stay there for the month. And my great grandmother got sick of taking care of them, and so she was like, your buddies are gonna pay for the food and staff, and we're gonna rent some horses, and it very organically became a dude ranch. But that was kind of like a thing that was happening in the mid-20s, and so it all kind of made sense to them at the time. Okay, it's 4:25. Thank you, guys. We'll see you tonight at Jerry's. Yeah.
If you think Juanita's a good storyteller, then you should join us Sunday night at the Wilma for Tell Us Something, where she is going to be one of the 8 storytellers. Thank you, everybody, and come back tomorrow morning. Our program starts at 9 o'clock.